The first documented lunch counter sit-ins in the U.S., they took place in Greensboro, North Carolina in February of 1960, and it was shortly after that sit-in demonstrations began in our city of Tampa. Arthenia, I'd like to start by asking you, how did you find out about the sit-ins, who organized it, and how did it come to the attention of the teenagers that were involved?
Well, Clarence Ford, a young barber here in Tampa, who was president of the NAACP Youth Council, went to talk to two young black men, George Edgecombe, the president of the student body at Middleton, and Shafter Scott, the president of the student body at Blake. And he said, you know, the world is evolving. The country now is beginning to see and understand, see and know how segregation has impacted people, and we are taking a stand against this evil that permeates America. And consequently, he said, can you all get me 20 students from each school that will be willing to go and sit in at Woolworths? So George Edgecombe at Middleton, and I was there, and he asked me if I would participate, and he got the other students, and Shafter did the same thing at Blake. And we came together and we met at St. Paul AME Church, and that's where Clarence Ford, who was the driving force, in fact, all of this was his idea, brilliant. He said, you know, and I was a member of the NAACP Youth Council, so I was just excited that now I was going to get an opportunity to stand up and speak out against what it was, what was wrong with Tampa and this country. So, of course, some of the students' parents said no. And
what about you?
Well, my dad said, I don't think you need to get in that. My mom said, do it. Do what your conscience dictates. We will support you. And Carmen Guignard even said her parents didn't even know. She just went ahead, or they told her no, but she was there. And so we convened, and we went over the rules and stay, you know, don't make eye contact, be prepared in case someone tries to harm you to turn your back, because this is a non-violent protest. And so we assembled at St. Paul AME Church, and we marched down to Woolworths. And the irony of the entire march was that we believed that we were the only sit-in protesters in America whose policemen protected us in a peaceful protest. And so that distinguished us from others, because this was 29 days after the initial march in Greensboro.
In North Carolina.
The initial, sit-in.
Fred, what was the role of the NAACP here in 1960, and why was it so important to this?
Well, the NAACP was the key organization. Shirley Lowry mentioned that Reverend Lowry was president of the NAACP. I want to add, for the state of Florida, not just, I mean, he was a national figure and throughout the state of Florida. The other person who was always content to kind of stay behind the scenes, but make sure things were going the way they should, was Robert W. Saunders, Bob Saunders, who was the field secretary for the NAACP. At a time when you could lose your life for doing this kind of work, not just be fired, not just be ostracized. You know, it was a dangerous time for people who stepped out and said, segregation must end, and we're going to take a stand, and we're putting our bodies on the line, not just talking about it, but actually being involved as activists. So Bob Saunders, you know, Reverend Leon Lowry, Clarence Ford, they were the leaders, but you had these young people. I also need to add that there were some students from Booker T. Washington Junior High School who Clarence recruited, and they were also part of this. These young people were extraordinarily brave for what they did.
And there were ripple effects to this, because it seemed like the rest of the nation began watching, what was it that happened in Tampa Bay and why was it so different? Watching the documentary, there was even a term for it, the Tampa technique. Shirley, I'd like to ask you, your husband was part of the biracial committee that was established by then Mayor Julian B. Lane, and there were equal numbers, right, of black and white leaders on that. And why do you feel that model was so successful?
Well, number one, the group. My husband, Julian Lane, Cody Fowler, and many others, James Hammond, that were on the group, that they trusted each other, number one. Number two, they all agreed that it should be nonviolent. And I think that is the main key to it being successful. The lunch counter, it was successful because they all agreed, they all made decisions on what the next move should be. So there were steps to this being successful. The whole group kind of got together and they talked and they discussed and they kind of learned from each other. They listened to each other. I think when you're in a group, the biracial group, Reverend said it was a group of people that had a lot of knowledge and was willing to push it forth so that Tampa can be a better city. So, white gentlemen and black gentlemen getting together and discussing what can we do in this city and make it, not violent.
Right.
So that was the big key, trust and nonviolence.
Mark, that's one of the aspects that you really did a deep dive into in your research for your stage play, the role of that biracial committee and how city leaders and police supported the participants in the sit-in. Tell us about that.
Yes, it was a remarkable confluence of events and a group of people. Julian Lane, the mayor of Tampa, was committed to racial equality.
Yes.
Cody Fowler, who was the lone white attorney who would represent African Americans in the early part of the 20th century, he was running the biracial committee. And Reverend Lowry, of course, was pivotal. What I discovered was that those negotiations were at an impasse for a while until the idea came out, what if we open all the lunch counters at once? This was a new idea because the contention of some of the owners of the restaurants was, if we accept blacks in our restaurant, everyone's going to go to our competition. So Cody Fowler, with the help of Reverend Lowry and with Julian and the people representing the lunch counters, said, we'll open everything. We'll open all the lunch counters at the same time. However, just think about it, the negotiations began in March. They didn't get finished till September.
That's right. The first day of the integrated dine-in was September the 18th, 1960.
So it wasn't a slam dunk. It took some work.
Yes.
Honoring the history of the civil rights movement in Tampa Bay starts with passing it down to the next generation, showing young people that they too can have positive impacts on their community, that they're not powerless to make change. And it's important to note that we all have a role to play, no matter our background.
I guess I like that soda now.
Coming up. And congratulations.
One of the qualities of the story is that it is regular people doing irregular things, regular people doing heroic things.
Leaders made sacrifice, students made sacrifice, and there's no regret.
I believe if we don't visit history, if we don't talk about the past, if we don't see how we progress, then we really do run the chance of repeating. There's a lack of that connection between young people and the next generation. It's being aware of your history.
This is the place to honor a moment in time so that people who watch it can make their own decisions and they can take this story and walk their own path with it.
It's particularly important right now that our students and generations to come know this story to remind them of the best of who we are.
Fred, why was it so important? Why is it so important for the next generation to know this story?
It's important because it's Tampa history, and it tells us, I think, where we need to go in the future. When we look at the progress that was made by black people in Tampa, in spite of segregation. And Central Avenue is the key thing that we can look at, where, you know, there were black business owners, black attorneys, black doctors, people who did extraordinary things against the odds in spite of the segregation that we face. So today, while we have desegregation and we have opportunities that did not exist, there are still challenges, but we can learn from the past, because in spite of all of the things that we had to overcome, we still found a way to move ahead, to move forward, to make progress. And so that's, I think, the value of learning our history. We can draw strength from the heroes of yesterday.
Shirley, what do you feel will be your husband's greatest legacy, Reverend Lowry's greatest legacy?
It's so many. He lived a long life. Reverend, of course, always said he wanted to make the world a better place, you know, than when he came in. But as far as the students, Reverend was proud of the sit-ins because of the students. So thank you, Ms. Arthenia. But he wanted to be a support system for that. So the sit-ins was a great legacy for him. Human rights, I think he would like to be known for his human rights fight. He even went to talk to John F. Kennedy to talk about human rights in the state of Florida. So I believe that is one of his biggest legacy, the fight for human rights, the fight for diversity, the fight for people to have rights as others. So,
Arthenia, do you ever feel discouraged in this battle for equality?
Never. It's in my DNA to fight for what I believe in. You know, and the Constitution guarantees pursuit of happiness for everybody. And as a young girl, having grown up on Central Avenue, as Fred had talked about, and my father owning the Cotton Club, a business there, a premier nightclub, I got an opportunity to see whatever I wanted to be. Every profession, from movie theaters to cab drivers, seamsters, beauticians, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, the gamut, everybody was represented, and I knew that I could be whatever I wanted to be. I was around it. So segregation in and of itself was not good, but we had a family there. Everybody looked out for everybody, and it was, and I had a wonderful experience as a child. It's when I stepped out of the bubble of Central Avenue that in comes this segregated society.
Do you remember clearly that day when you first walked into that counter and were able to be served?
Absolutely.
What was it like?
Oh, the first day, yes, because, you know, we had some trepidation, but we were young and fearless and ready to make a change. And everybody was fired up, but we had a somber look on our faces, and we went and we sat and we asked to be served. When Tampa changed and the world was able to see that through negotiation and collaboration and people who are like-minded and want to do what's right, that you can achieve success, and we did. Our work was not in vain. We got real success from what we did.